Our first guest of honor, Bill Friedkin, won an Oscar for directing The French Connection before revolutionizing the horror genre as the director of The Exorcist, which was nominated for 10 Oscars. His most recent film, Killer Joke, will be released this summer. Please welcome Bill Friedkin.
Nice to see you. Thanks for coming out to see a 40-year-old movie.
Tell me, Bill, when you see that film, what do you think about it?
You know, it's 40 years ago, Stuart, and I remember that when I started to work on the film with Bill Blatty, I had in my mind that it would be a kind of genre horror film. But then while we were preparing the picture, I got to know the president of Georgetown. It was a man named Father Robert Henley. And he gave us complete run of the Georgetown campus. And I got to go into his office at the end of a day, and he had a bottle of J&B in his desk, and we'd sit around and have a drink. And one day he said to me, I've got something to show you. And he pulled out an old beat-up red file case, and he handed it to me while we were throwing back shots of J&B, and it was the diaries of the doctors and nurses and, you want me to use that? I do indeed. Sorry, guys. Did you hear anything I've said? Okay, this is better though. It was the diary of the doctors and nurses and priests who were involved in the case that this story was loosely based on. And it was a 14-year-old boy in Silver Spring, Maryland, and the family was Lutheran, and they tried everything. They went to every possible form of internal and external medicine to cure this boy, and nothing seemed to work. And one day it was their Lutheran pastor who told them to go to the Catholic Church and to try an exorcism. And so there were 3 cases in the 20th century that I'm aware of that the Catholic Church authorized as demonic possession in the United States. You know, as opposed to what you read now, there's a different case of possession almost every week somewhere. But in those days, it really wasn't like that. And this was the 1949 case, which is what inspired Bill to write this, is the one that took place in Silver Spring. As I say, it was a young man who retired about 7 or 8 years ago from NASA. And he has no memory of what happened to him as a child. When I read these diaries, I knew that this was, you know, much, much more than a horror film. And I resisted all impulses that I may have had to push the horror aspect of it. To me, Blatty and I never spoke about a horror film. We spoke about a film about the mystery of faith. And that's what attracted me to it, and that's why it was done the way it was.
What were the biggest challenges directing the film?
Well, of course, the special effects had never been done. None of this. So we had to do everything mechanically. There were several attempts at the makeup, and Dick Smith, who I know you all know or have heard of, did many different passes. And then one day, it occurred to me that what was wrong with the stuff that he was showing me was that it was not generic in any way. It was just horror film makeup. And I remember thinking about that, and I said to him one day, Dick, there is this scene in the film where you see the little girl masturbating with a crucifix. It may be possible that she has used this crucifix on her face, and that the wounds result from that. The scars and the makeup result from these gangrenous wounds. And Dick got a hold of some books on gangrenous wounds and people who were severely burned in fire, and he took a whole new approach to the makeup, because the original makeup that we had tested, you see little flash frames of it. You've seen the subliminal cuts, haven't you? You guys are all hip to that. Those were our original makeup tests, not on Linda Blair. Those are on a stand-in that's really in the film for about 12 seconds. But we did the makeup tests on her, the white face thing, and and it didn't work as makeup, but I used little frames of it for subliminal cuts of the demon.
That's great. Why don't we do one question? We'll bring our other guests out.
Were you the right man for the right moment for the right script, or was it something a little deeper for you that drew you in?
No. But I will tell you this, that Bill Blatty had never seen anything that I directed when he offered me The Exorcist. I had made one film in the late 60s with Sonny and Cher. It's pretty bad, but it was my first film. Before that, I had done documentaries and live television. But the film got a lot of attention in Hollywood, and this Blake Edwards was planning to produce a feature film of his television series, Peter Gunn. I went to his office, he gave me the script, and I read the script and I hated it. It was terrible. And I went in to see Blake the following Monday. He said, so? And I said, Blake, this is the worst script I've ever read. He stood up and he said, what do you know? You're nothing but a punk kid. You don't know anything. And you're telling me this script is no good? I said, Blake, it's awful. I'd love to work with you, but I can't do this. It's just terrible. And there were some people in the room. They were in the shadows. I didn't see them. I didn't know who they were, studio guys, whatever. And I left, and as I left the building, this guy came running after me. He said, my name is Bill Blatty, and I'm the guy who wrote that script. I didn't see Blatty after that for 4 years, and I was on tour with the French Connection. Before I left Los Angeles to go to the East Coast, there was a package that came in the mail in a brown paper bag, and it was from William Peter Blatty. And I only remembered this terrible script of Peter Gunn. And so I threw the package into my suitcase and forgot about it and took it with me across country. And then when I came back by way of San Francisco, my last night of this tour, I opened this package and I started to read the novel, The Exorcist. And I canceled my dinner plans and read the whole thing that night, and I was flabbergasted. And he had his phone number on the script, and I called him and I said, Bill, this is sensational. This is just great. And he told me some of the background, which we may cover later. And he said, would you like to direct the film? And I said, why? He said, because you're the only director who ever told me the truth about one of my scripts. He had not seen The French Connection or the 2 other films I had made before that. And that's how I got to direct the film.
John Piehlmeyer is the acclaimed playwright of the world premiere staged adaptation of The Exorcist, which is coming to the Geffen Playhouse in July. His previous works include the award-winning play Agnes of God. Randy Arney is artistic director of the Geffen. He's responsible for selecting and shepherding the new production of The Exorcist onto the stage. The play coming to the Geffen is based on the book, not the film. So kind of talk about your process and kind of putting that together.
Well, when the opportunity came to me to adapt this book for the stage, my instant reaction was actually the first question that most people ask me is, how are you going to make her head turn around? And I thought, that's not the kind of thing we want to see on the stage. And I felt very strongly that, first of all, I just think this is a fucking brilliant movie. And there was no way that I wanted to try to replicate what the movie on the stage. And I met with Bill Blatty and I said, look, the way I would want to do this is with a minimal cast, 6 or slightly more. We ended up with 9. And with no special effects, or very minimal special effects. And a play that was incredibly theatrical and presentational. And he liked that idea. He responded to that and gave me permission to go off and write it.
When I first read this script, we are thrilled to get to do the first ever stage version of this amazing story. And as Bill just said to you, the center of the story is ultimately this incredible struggle for faith, a struggle between faith and despair. And there is nothing more central to the stage than, if the center of all drama is conflict, there is no more primal conflict than between the demon and the human for the soul. And in fact, theater history is loaded with the demon on stage, all the way back to Faustus. And so it seemed like an absolutely perfect thing to put on the stage. As you said, Stu, the trick is you have one location, a 40-foot opening. And our director, John Doyle, who is a world-famous director, who directed famously a version of Sweeney Todd in New York, where he completely reimagined that, has come up with a central place, a central umbrella, where all of the action of this play takes place. And it's very Catholic in its feel. It's very old, and that gives the whole piece a real authenticity.
A question for Mr. Friedkin. Obviously, you got the chance to revisit the film 10 years ago and add back in some footage. But I'm curious to know, especially with the play coming out now 40 years later, if you were making that as a movie right now, how different would it be? How different would your take be on it?
You couldn't make this film right now. The one thing I would probably do, to be honest, is use the modern technology. I would use computer-generated imagery, which would have made all of the special effects much more believable, possibly even more disturbing. But we had to do everything mechanically. You couldn't make this film this way now because it is too serious. You would have to have a bunch of explosions and comic book characters, and a guy would come in as the Exorcist with a letter on his chest. You know, that's what film is today.
I was thinking, watching the film also, that, Ellen's still working these days, and Max von Sydow was just in the film last year. It's nice to see these guys still working and doing great work.
Jason Miller passed away a few years ago. Linda Blair is still around. She's now 52 years old.
Do you keep in touch with the actor?
I keep in touch with him, absolutely, all the time. Jason died a few years ago, back in Scranton, where he came from. He had never made a film before. I saw his picture in a newspaper. He had written a play called That Championship Season, which won a Pulitzer Prize and a Tony Award. Right. I saw his picture in the New York Times. We had cast somebody else, who shall be nameless. And I told my casting director in New York, I want to meet this guy because I read the article about him, and it said in the article in the New York Times that he was married to Jackie Gleason's daughter, and he was a milkman at the time in Flushing, New York, but he had had small parts in off-Broadway plays and on the road. And he wasn't of great interest to me. But then I read that he had studied to be a priest at Catholic University in Washington and dropped out because of a crisis of faith. And so I read that, and I'm looking at his picture, and I saw Father Karras. So I went to the studio, and I said, we have to, unfortunately, let the actor that we signed go, and I'm going to go with this guy. And they said, well, who is he? He's a playwright. Has he ever acted? Not really. He's done some small parts. But again, the entire cast was like handed to me. by some thing.